Well, very cool. My name is Sister Laura. I teach over at Viterbo University and have been for the last 13 years or so. I use she, her pronouns. So I'm super excited that you are going to be going out to Fort McCoy. I have been out there since the beginning. I was invited to go out in August and have been out multiple days every week since our guests arrived. So my plan today is actually really simple. It's just to let you know a little bit about who you're going to meet there and some things that you should think about doing and some things that you should think about not doing when you're out at Fort McCoy. But again, thank you so much for going out. I can tell you that the guests out there are going to be super excited to meet you. So trigger warning, I am going to talk about sexual assault very briefly. So maybe September or so, I was out at the Children's Center and we were coloring with the kids. And I would go around and I would talk to the kids. They didn't necessarily speak a lot of English, so I would do a lot of things, like if they were coloring a pig, I would say pig, and then they would tell me in Dari or Pashto what that animal was. And I would go around sometimes and say, oh, black or blue, or, point out the colors. And there was one kid that was kind of in the corner, pretty intensely quiet and really into his work, but there was something sort of heavy about his presence. So I went and sat down with him and tried to talk to him, and he didn't speak a lot of English. And I kept saying, well, what are you coloring? What are you drawing? And he couldn't answer me, didn't know what I was asking. So we had a volunteer who came by who could speak Pashto. He comes by, and I said, can you ask the kid what he's coloring? I'd like to know what he's drawing here. And so as the kid is answering this volunteer, I see the volunteer's color run completely out of his face. And he turns to me and he said, he's remembering a time when the Taliban took turns on top of his mother. Now, I tell you that heavy story because I want you to know who you are going to be working with. The experiences of the people that you are going to meet are beyond what most of us can even imagine. Right? If you saw anything on TV or social media about what was happening in Afghanistan, these are the people that you are going to meet. The ones that you saw on TV are the people you are going to meet. They have experienced trauma and heartache in ways that most of us can never understand. I tell you that up front because I want you to remember why we go out there. We go out there for these people. But in going out there, we need to exercise compassion and patience. When you're there with a kid and the kid starts screwing around and he's angry and he throws something, I want you to have compassion because he's probably dealing with and remembering and trying to process something that's beyond our understanding. The kids there are great. You're going to love them. They are typical kids, right? They want to play. They want to just have fun. They want to learn, right? But there are going to be some times where you're going to experience a kid sitting off by themselves, or they're randomly going to cry. Just in the middle of nothing, they're going to start to cry. Or someone could get angry very quickly. They are processing trauma that we can't imagine. So please, 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 let's have compassion when we're out there. So let me tell you a little bit about who's going to be out there and about the guests there. The first thing you will notice when you get out to Fort McCoy is that they do not call the Afghans refugees. That's actually a legal distinction. They're in the process of getting refugee paperwork. Fort McCoy calls them guests, and so you will start using that language fairly soon about working with the guests out there. Now, Fort McCoy is not entirely forthcoming about numbers, but we're looking at probably 7,000 or so folks that are still there. And a lot of those folks that are there are going to be there with us through the spring. So there's a whole process to getting integrated into the United States. A lot of the guests will get relocated in different areas. So they're not going to be relocated here necessarily in the La Crosse area. They're going places like Arizona, Los Angeles, Boston, Minneapolis, Chicago, St. Louis. Those are kind of the top places. But it takes a while to process their paperwork, to do the background checks, and to make sure there's a sponsoring agency or family where they're going to be going. And so we're about probably halfway through the guests processing them. The first half was the easy part. The second half of the people who are out there are the harder part because they don't necessarily have connections or don't necessarily have the highly desired skills that the U.S. processes quickly. So you're going to be meeting folks that are there, who are going to be there pretty much through the spring. Hopefully they will start to dwindle through the spring because that means they're getting relocated. But we're looking around 7,000 or so, give or take. Fort McCoy is never specific about numbers. The population out there is wildly diverse. We don't think too much about Afghanistan. And when we think Afghanistan, we don't think of great diversity. But I want you to think of the United States and the great diversity there. You will see that in the Afghan people. They are a very, very diverse group. So there are 19 different ethnic groups that you will probably encounter. So you will see folks from different ethnic groups, from different tribes that are out there, right? So there's great diversity. Education-wise, there's also great diversity. There are PhDs out there, and so their kids have had lots of opportunities for school. There's peasants there who may be barely literate, if literate at all. I had the opportunity a couple times last month to work with a woman who is probably about my age, mid-40s, in how to hold a pencil. She had never once held a pencil, right? So you will find folks that maybe their parents have barely literate or illiterate skill level. You will also find the children of PhDs out there, so it's wildly diverse. Afghanistan itself is a diverse country in terms of geography. And so there's been a lot of talk, like with it being cold and snowy, you know, how are the guests going to be? There's guests that live way up in the mountains, and there's folks that live kind of out in the desert. So you can't assume that necessarily they've never experienced snow, because there's quite a few who have experienced snow, absolutely. And there's guests from all different sort of regions, right, or different cities, from big cities like Kabul to small rural villages where they've not experienced large groups of people, right? So you're going to see a whole variety and a whole mix of experiences out there, of education levels, and just ethnic identity. All of the guests out there, every single guest out there is Muslim, right? And that's actually how I get involved because when I teach religion over at Viterbo, and I teach world religions, and I do my research in Islam. And that's how I first got out there, was working with the Muslims out there, trying to get set up for prayers and all. There's a lot that we know or don't know about Islam, and there's a lot of assumptions we make about Islam. Those assumptions need to go out the window when you actually get out to Fort McCoy, because you will see folks who are Muslim in a very conservative way. You will experience folks who are Muslim in a very liberal way, and all in between. I'd say probably about a third of the girls will wear the hijab, right, the head covering. Nobody out there has worn a burqa that I've seen, and the women, of course, I would say about half of the women wear the hijab. They have opportunities for prayers. You will see the prayers going on. Now they're doing it indoors because it's so cold. But you will certainly encounter different group prayers and all. What I would say to you is what I would say to a lot of volunteers. When you do encounter some prayer, please just try to be very respectful and kind of watch off to the side, right? And try not to interrupt. And for goodness sakes, and this is coming from a nun, because I'm a Franciscan sister, I'm a nun. When I say this to you, please don't try to one-up their prayer by talking about Christianity, right? We're not there to convert. It's amazing how many volunteers have gone out there with the intention of like, I'm going to help and teach, but here's a book about Jesus Christ, right? It's ridiculous to do that out there, okay? So that's a little bit of background out there. Most of the folks that you will meet are going to be children. Ranges obviously from newborn, I think there are 20 or so now that have been born at Fort McCoy, all the way up to 18 and beyond. So the schools that you're going to be part of, that you're going to be helping with, are going to be different age groups. There's a number of different classroom type settings out there. So you may be, I'm not exactly sure which you're going to be in, but you're going to see a mix of different things and different experiences in those classrooms. So again, the majority out there are children. I'd say most families have at least 3 or 4 children. You will have an opportunity to meet their parents, especially if you have the little ones. Parents will often come, watch what you're doing sometimes. Will make sure that their kid feels safe and feels comfortable. So when you do meet the parents, here's some things to do and don't do. First off, gentlemen, you do not extend your hand for a handshake with a woman, okay? The women don't do that. The women are the ones that decide whether to extend for a handshake or not. So in their culture, it's rude if a man just goes up and says, hey, right? So wait for the woman to wish to shake hands with you. I've actually found that there's not a lot of handshaking at all out there, actually. It's a lot of sort of nodding and saying hi. The parents that you will meet are not going to be entirely literate or not going to be entirely fluent in English, right? You'll meet some, but a lot of folks you're going to meet, especially the parents, are not going to speak English, so a lot of gestures and nods. What you can say, right, and it is fairly good for both men and women to do this, is if you go up and you pass by someone, you can say salam. So salam. That just means peace. And they will say salam to you. Okay? Y'all still with me? Okay. So let's talk about some of the more important do's and don'ts. When you get out to Fort McCoy, the first thing that they will tell you, and I will remind you of 1,000,000 times over, is that you do not take pictures. The Army gets really antsy if you take pictures of their facilities. But I'm more concerned with taking pictures of the guests that are out there. Please don't. Please do not take any pictures. Remember that these folks are here because they had to flee the violence of their country. They are wanted individuals. The Taliban has a price tag out on some of their heads. And to know that they fled could put their families in more danger. So we don't take any pictures because we know how pictures move around and where pictures go. We also don't post anything on social media about the guests. If you want to say something generic like, wow, I had an amazing time working with children out at Fort McCoy, that's fine. But not, oh, I met Sarah and Bob, or more like Muhammad and Rafiq, right? You don't want to put their names on social media and you don't want to take pictures, right? Fort McCoy is concerned with the military side of it. I'm just concerned with the humanitarian side. These are wanted people. We don't want to advertise them more than we need to. Okay, so no pictures when you get out there. When you work with the kids, right, you're going to find that they are fantastic. They are energetic. They have lots of desire to play. They are bored as heck, right? They are living in a small confined area with not a lot of room to move. The guests cannot leave Fort McCoy, so they are stuck on post. All right, so they don't get to go places. They don't get to do a whole lot. There aren't a lot of activity centers. There are women and children's centers, which are open 4 hours a day for the little kids to play. There's also a rec center, and some of you, I hope, will be in that rec center playing basketball, or there's a foosball table in one of them, a ping pong table, things like that. So they do have those opportunities, but they basically get to go back to their bunks. They live in long dormitories or barracks where they're there with at least 20 other people per floor. So they're going to be really excited to see you, and they love to play. They love to play. So play with them. Engage them, right? Joke around with them. Have fun. That's why you're there, is to help them have a space to be kids, right? Teaching them is a part of that. A couple of things that you want to make sure you do and you don't do when you are playing around with the kids. The first thing is you need to remember, back to my original story, that these kids have experienced trauma. So trauma-informed care means that we don't do things that might be sort of scary movements for kids. So one of the things you never want to do is kind of come up and bear hug a kid, right? You know, sometimes we do that with kids when you're playing, right? You never want to do that. You never want to make a grab. They will try to hug you. They're huggy people, without a doubt. But let them initiate that move. You don't initiate that. The second thing you want to do is never come up and lean over. So say a kid is at a table, you don't want to come up and lean over the table and say, "What are you doing?" Right? That gesture of kind of being over and on top is pretty frightening for some of the kids. So what you really want to do is come around to the front and then talk to them while looking at them. One of the best things that you can do for little kids is that you get down on their level. You know, so kind of squat down or kneel down. And so you're looking eye to eye. You're not kind of towering over top of the kids. You're probably not going to hear stories like I told you, and that's a good thing. And that's not your job, is to ask those stories, right? So when you talk to the kids, if you want to ask them, like, what are you coloring, that's great. But don't say, "So tell me about your family, and do you have family still there? Or, you know, what was the trauma like?" Right? We don't need to get into their trauma. They will tell you some things if they get to know you. And that's okay. But let's not get into asking that. Right? Your job is just to be there to let kids be kids when they're there. Okay? Another thing that I want you to be aware of, if you slip up, it's okay, because I do it at different times. The kids are in a transition of learning. They're coming out of their culture, and they're trying to learn a little bit about American culture. So they're kind of in this transition process. So they're understanding if you make some cultural mistakes. But here's one of the cultural mistakes. Thumbs up. Thumbs up is pretty much considered the middle finger in Afghanistan, right? So I am flipping you off in Afghanistan. So one of the things I love to do with the kids, especially if I can't speak to them, right, if I don't know their language as well, is that I'll come up and say, "Hey, that looks great." That's not too good, right? Now, they are learning that in the United States, this means good, right? So they're in the process, but if you slip up and you give a thumbs up to something and they kind of look at you funny, right? Kind of put your thumb down and say, that's good, right? Kind of re-emphasize that it's not a bad thing. The other thing that's cultural that can be offensive is the bottom of your feet. So if you're sitting down on the ground, right, you're playing an activity or you're sitting, you want to make sure that the bottom of your feet are not facing people, right? So if you like to sit with your feet straight out and you're in a circle, you've just now like flipped off basically half of that circle, okay? Feet are seen as very offensive, the bottom of feet, because they're dirty, right? And in Afghan culture, they're very dirty. So you don't want to do that when you're with the kids. So sitting cross-legged, kind of tucking your feet around, or kind of sitting so your feet are pointing back, right? However you need to do that. But just be aware that the bottom of your feet is not a great thing culturally. Again, they're learning, right? So not everyone is going to be look at you with horror if you do sit with your feet pointing towards people, right? But just be aware if you get a funny look or two about that. Okay? Cool. All right. So at this point, let me just stop and see what questions you have. Right? What do you want to know before you go out there?
So this is an example that they have a gesture that is similar to this. That's
Touchdown. Yay! Great. Yep. Excellent question. Literally touchdown, which I see a lot of Green Bay Packers stuff, so apparently y'all are happy that that happened yesterday. I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan, so I didn't get to do this a lot yesterday.
So I was wondering if they needed equipment, like soccer balls and that kind of thing.
Yes, so they actually don't. They have a lot of soccer balls out there, which I should tell you, we would think that soccer would be really popular. It isn't. Volleyball is the thing. So they will turn everything into volleyball. Like, literally, you give them a soccer ball and it turns into a volleyball. Now, there are some soccer games. They will play some soccer games, but it's amazing to watch soccer balls being used for volleyball. So we've had a lot of donors that have given out equipment, right? So they have pretty much what they need, or what they need is on a list where we have more donors that are giving money. So they actually don't need equipment. That said, they are going to beg you to give them a soccer ball or a volleyball or a ball of some sorts. In fact, please, ball, please, ball is pretty normal to hear them say. Which kind of leads to another point. Don't give them anything. Unless you are authorized to give them something, don't give them something. Right? When you're in the learning centers, you'll be able to give a notebook and a pencil or a pen or something, but don't give beyond that. Even if a kid just follows you around, ball, please give me a ball. The problem is that when you give something to someone, it turns into sort of a frenzy of other people wanting things. It also becomes something that can be stolen. So you're going to see that multiple kids will have balls. They've been able to get balls. They've stolen some balls from the rec center and all. But please try not to give out things unless you're told specifically you can give these 5 balls away. Okay?
How about gestures like high fives and stuff?
They love high five. Oh my goodness. So the soldiers that were in Afghanistan taught them high five, and they see high five as an amazing gesture. So
even little girls and stuff?
Absolutely. They will all high five. In fact, they will often get in a line and come back and high five. Right? Or they'll just keep doing this because they find it so much fun. Yeah. What other questions do you have? Yes?
How many can we expect to speak English?
Yeah, great question.
Some sort of English.
Great question. So the kids themselves have been picking up the language quite quickly, and they've been exposed to and have a lot of opportunity for English. So they're going to know some of the basics. Yes and no, my name is, your name is, right? Beyond that, I would say, because again, they're catching on pretty quickly, I would say probably 15% are fluent, and probably a good 50% beyond that are really knowledgeable, but maybe just not quite with every word, right? And then some, part of what they're learning out there is language, and so some are going to be pretty minimal, although that's, again, there's a lot of catching up of language that's happening. So they will understand the basics when you're out there. We do have, out at Fort McCoy, hired translators. So there are men and women who are Afghans themselves who now live in the United States who are paid to come and be translators at the centers. So don't hesitate, if a kid is asking you for something and you don't know what, or you're trying to tell somebody, a kid, something and they don't understand you, just say to the translator, and they wear white vests, you'll know them, you'll see very clearly out there. Don't hesitate to say, so what is he trying to ask me? I'm not sure. And I should say this too about language. There's actually 5 different languages that can be spoken among the Afghan people. Primarily, the guests at Fort McCoy would be Pashto and Dari. And Pashto and Dari are sort of like German and Spanish. So they're not really closely related. There's a few words and all. If you want to pick up some of that, they'll teach you some of the words. That's great. I've been out there since August, and I know like 5 words, and that's it. Because I find that their languages to be rather complex. But feel free to reach out to the translators. That's why they're there. They're paid. They're paid to come in for like 3-4 weeks at a time to do translation. What other questions do you have? Well, I would just ask you to do this, right? To remember the story I started with, and to remember that this is not about you. This is about the guests, and this is about the kids, and you providing opportunities for the kids to have great experiences, to learn a little bit about their new country, the country that they are now coming to. A place you are providing an opportunity for them to be kids, to do something normal. Remember what happened in August. They were scooped up by the parents, they were crammed onto a plane, and they were flown here with nothing. When I tell you nothing, I mean nothing. Like, you will see what they wear are donations now. My friend Sher Khan, I made lots of new friends out there, but Sher Khan is a journalist who's out as a guest. And he tells the story of his escape this way. He was a journalist in Kabul, and he was pretty critical of the Taliban. So when the Taliban started to overtake Kabul, he had to flee. He was given 30 minutes to get his wife, pull his kids out of school, and get on a plane and get out of there. His kids went to school that day, never had a chance to go home. They couldn't take their favorite toy, their stuffed animal, anything that they had. These are kids that were scooped up and whisked away, right, without any warning. You're helping to provide a space where they can be kids. Nothing has been normal for them since August. Nothing has been normal. You can help restore some of that normalcy. So really just remember to be compassionate. Remember to be all about the kids. This is not about you, right? This is not your resume booster. This is truly about being a lovely and welcoming presence for the kids. Cool? I can't thank you enough for going out there. They will love you. They will absolutely love you. I have gone out and played with them many, many times, and then they joke it with me because I get hot and red and exhausted because I'm middle-aged. And then they'll tell me, like, oh, you're old. I'm like, yes, I am. So they need someone young to come out and play with them and to just be with them. So I'm very excited for you. I'm very grateful. They will tell you thanks, but I will also say thank you on behalf of the guests, right? On behalf of our newer or soon-to-be new U.S. citizens, thank you so much for taking the time and the effort to get out there.